Hi y'all, Billy here. Welcome to the Messy Studio. This is the second episode in So You Want to Turn Pins. The last episode we talked about lathes. Now we're going to talk about the tools that you're going to need in order to turn pins. So where do we start? Well, obviously you're going to need some kind of turning tools. Specifically, you don't need a whole lot. Maybe a spindle gouge, a skew, and a parting tool. You can get them from a number of sources. You can get them as inexpensively or as expensively as you wish. That's pretty much up to you. Penn State Industry sells a set specifically made for pins. They're not bad, but they're not as good as something you're going to get from, say, Sorby or Henry Taylor or Crown or Thompson, Carter. But just go with what your budget lets you. It would be easy for me to stand here and tell you to lay out the money on expensive tools, but I don't have a lot of expensive tools myself. My most expensive gouges are my patience and nickels. I do have a Henry Taylor spindle gouge that I bought on sale some years back, and I really like it. Can I tell a difference between the quality of it and, say, some of the stuff, that the Benjamin's Best stuff that I got years ago from Penn State? Maybe a little. I've still got them and I still use them, but I've still got the Henry Taylor and I still use it too. Let your budget be your guide on the tool selection. But again, for turning pins, the most important thing is, what tools do you really need to turn a pin? Lathe tools, that is. And again, that would be your spindle gouge, a small skew, and the parting tool. Another question that constantly comes up concerning your turning tools, your chisels and your skews, is, how do I sharpen them? That's a good question. It's a valid question. I've started sharpening basically on a 6-inch high-speed grinder. That's not a good choice, but that was all I had. 8-inch grinder is best, slow speed, or at least variable speed. And the reason I say 8-inch over 6-inch is because with the 6-inch you got a wheel basically like this, so you get a more or a deeper arc on the face of the tool when you're sharpening it. With an 8-inch wheel, it's a little bit bigger yet, so you have less of a concave in the face of the tool that you're turning, or what would be called a hollow ground, if you will. A hollow ground isn't necessarily bad, but the least steep you can make that hollow, the better. That's why the 8-inch is better, and slow speed is because of heat dissipation. As far as what kind of wheels you need on the grinder, that varies too. I would love to have CBN wheels. Those are by far the best. They reduce heat, they don't wear down, so you don't have to dress them, but not everybody can afford CBN wheels. Right now I have white Norton wheels on my 8-inch grinder. Yeah, I have to dress them once in a while, but they've been serving me well for the last 10 years. I've got another set of blue Nortons up here in the cabinet behind me. They're supposed to even be better than the whites. They're not cheap, but they don't cost as much as a CBN, and I got them on sale again some years back. See, that's the thing. If you have the time to look around for sales and specials, you can get some good deals. On occasion, Woodcraft will put some turning tools on sale. That's a good place to get some. Look on Amazon, see what you can find there. There's always something going on Amazon. I'm not going to get into sharpening in this series. There have been a number of sharpening videos put out there by other turners that'll serve you much better than what I could do here. I'll try to put some links in the description down below. Another thing you're going to need to turn pins is bushings. What are bushings? That's a good question. Another thing you're going to need to turn pins is a mandrel. unless you turn like I do and turn between centers, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I quit using a mandrel some years back. I've still got my mandrels, but this is what a mandrel looks like. Now this, you see the two pieces here and the threads in the middle. This is an adjustable mandrel. This is from Penn State Industries. And you put these are bushings. These are slimline bushings. The slimline is the smallest, least expensive pen kit that you can buy, and we'll talk more about that when we get into pen kits in a later episode. The bushings are sized. They're not only sized to fit on the standard 7mm mandrel, but to let you turn the pen barrel down to the size appropriate to fit the appointments. That's the pieces that come in the pen kit, like the nib and end cap assembly and the center ring. So they're sized to let you turn down to that particular diameter. It keeps you from having to use calipers all the time when you're making your turning, which brings up another point. You can use calipers to turn to diameter on each of your end and not have to worry about using bushings at all, but using the bushings is a little bit easier. So the bushings go on the mandrel. Like I said, these are the slimline bushings. Now, concerning the mandrel and the bushings are literally the only thing you need to be able to turn pens. But when you start cranking down on the nut here at the end, and you've got pen blanks in between here, if the ends of your pen blanks aren't absolutely 100% square, when you crank down on this nut, you can actually bow this mandrel a little bit. It's pretty tough stuff, but you're putting a lot of pressure down on there. And you butt your tailstock up against here, and you start turning the pen, but you can really get some serious pressure on here. And you can bend it, which leads to non-concentric pen barrels, which means they're not fully round. So you want to keep them fully round. So how can I use a mandrel and still make sure I get fully round pen barrels without cramping this between centers? That would be to use a mandrel saver. The mandrel saver looks a lot like a live center, except it's hollow in the middle, doesn't have a point on it, and it slides over your mandrel. Some people use it with a nut. Most use it without the nut. Like I said, it is hollow. I don't have a mandrel saver because I don't turn on a mandrel anymore. But it slides over here and compresses, so you're pushing strictly from the pen up into the headstock, which is where the Morse taper mounts. So you're just pushing straight against this, so you're not going to get that bow, and you'll get concentric pen blanks. So if you're going to use a mandrel, get the mandrel saver. It's well worth it. If you don't elect to go with the mandrel saver, at the very least, you're going to need a 60-degree live center. A 60-degree live center is necessary because the hole drilled in the end of the pen mandrel was made by a 60-degree bit, and it fits perfectly. You should not use the live center that came with your lathe. The reason is because more often than not, this point is not ground to 60 degrees, and you'll begin to wear the point of your live center out. But if you're going to use the mandrel, I recommend the mandrel saver. Something else that you're going to need is a way to cut your pen blanks in half, or at least to trim them if you're doing a single barrel pen like the Sierra or the Atlas or the Polaris, or there's any number. I use my bandsaw. You can use a table saw. You can use a chop saw if you're careful. Those are dangerous. You just got to know what you're doing. I use my bandsaw, and I made this sled to go on my bandsaw. It's just 1/4 inch plywood with a piece of hardwood on it. I happen to have some channel that I put on there. I have my blade mark to tell me where that I'm going to be cutting, and on the bottom I've got a runner that goes in the miter slot of the bandsaw. Let me show you what it looks like. I put the bandsaw in place. Let's say I have a mark on my blank. I know where I'm going to cut. I put it on my sled, run it through the bandsaw, cuts it straight, and then I can drill my holes. Another thing you're going to have are drill bits. Drill bits specifically sized to drill the hole that your pin tube takes. And the pin instructions, each one of them is different. It tells you what size bits you're going to need. And everyone that sells pin kits also sells the drill bits to go along with them. Those can get expensive. I have some larger pins that required specific drill bits that were not in the set that I have. So I have had to buy those from the source. Or you can maybe try to find them a little cheaper on someplace like the Little Machine Shop or Inco. What drill bit set do I use? I use that big titanium nitride set that's got all the numbered bits, it's got all the lettered bits, and it's got your SAE bits in it from Harbor Freight. I've still got them. Yes, over the years I've broken a few bits, but those are not the bits that I need for turning pins. A lot of people will tell you that the best bits to use for turning pins are brad points because they cut a little bit straighter. I have a set of brad point bits and I haven't noticed a whole lot of difference. Which brings us to another point, and that's, how do you drill that pin blank? Well, don't do it by hand. It needs to be as straight through the pin blank as you can possibly get it. That means you're either going to have a drill press, but you've got a lathe. Why not use it? Which is what I do. I do all my drilling on the lathe, but that's easy for me because I've got these step jaws which are longer. You either need a long nose jaw or step jaws to put your blank between to hold it to the end of the headstock while you drill out the middle. And I use this method because it spins true, it runs the blank true, and I get a true hole through the middle of the blank. These are scroll jaws. That's more of an optional tool, but if you're going to turn other things, you're going to end up with scroll jaws anyway. So this is what I use. If you don't have this, and you've got a small drill press or even a full size, which is best because it's got a longer quill travel, then just drill them on your drill press. The only thing you need with a drill press though is some way to make sure that you hold that pin blank perfectly vertical. The least expensive way to do that is with one of these. This is a 6-inch wood clamp. You can find them all over the place. They're not that expensive, but just put your blank in here, tighten it down, set it flat on the bed of your drill press, and drill it through. Now some people have cut 45-degree angles in those to better hold the blank, and that's a good idea. I would do that if I were going to use this method. Another device that you might use for drilling blanks on a drill press is a pin vise. A number of companies sell these, in my opinion, and they're not cheap by any means. In my opinion, the best made out there is made by a machinist in Oklahoma. His name is Paul Huffman. You can find him under the username of Paul in OKC on the International Association of Penturners forum. I've mentioned this forum a few times. I'll put a link in the description below. But he makes the very best pin vise out there. He makes them as he'll take a list, you get on his order list, and he makes them in batches, and he'll send them out to you. The last price I saw on these was $115. Like I said, they're not cheap, but it is a good option. You just put the blank in, tighten it up. It's dead square as long as your table is square, and there's ways and videos on YouTube to tell you how to square your table up. It's simple. Use a coat hanger wire, put it in the chuck, and you're good to go. I've mentioned IAP, or International Association of Penturners, before. It's a forum where penturners from around the globe discuss and show their pens and their work and the things that they're doing. A lot of questions answered there, and also a lot of tutorials. If you are going to drill on the lathe like I do, you're going to need one of these. This is a drill chuck attached to a Morse Taper 2. You can get these from Penn State Industries or anybody else that sells pen kits, most likely. You can also get them from the little machine shop or Inco, and that goes into your tailstop. Once I have the blank cut to length, which in this case I do not, I have not cut that blank, so it would actually only be sticking out to about here. Once I have it cut to length, I put it in my chuck, turn the lathe on its slowest speed, and drill my hole. And that's how I prepare and drill my pen blanks. So those are some of the tools that you're going to need. Again, a lot of those tools are optional, and there's other ways to do a lot of this stuff. But I've showed you what you need. I've told you what you need. And I've showed you some ways that I do it, my preferred method. That's me. Some other people do it the same way I do. A lot of them don't. You're going to have to find what works best for you. And I've tried to put this together so that it makes some sort of sense. I hope it's not too rambly. I hope you all understand it. If you have any questions at all, give me a shout. I'll be happy to answer them as best I can. I mentioned that I don't use a mandrel anymore. I turn between centers. What does that mean? Turning between centers simply means that I put the pen blank in between a dead center, which costs about $5 or $6, in my headstock. This is my drive center. It's a Morse Taper 2. They call it a dead center. It's at 60 degrees as well. The dead center goes into the headstock. 60-degree live center goes into the tailstock, and I put the pen barrel in between centers. Let me show you. This is what the setup looks like for turning between centers. Now, I don't have a pen blank glued to this tube because my doctor hasn't cleared me to do anything like that yet. So I just took a tube and stuck it between two bushings. These happen to be homemade bushings. I made these myself using calipers. I made them out of Corian. They work just fine. That's a cheap man option. I didn't have very many of that particular pen, so I decided rather than spend the money on bushings to try to make my own, and it worked out all right. I used a 60-degree bit to drill the ends, and we've got bushings. I can now turn a pen to the right diameter. So that's what turning between centers looks like. And if you want to see more of that in action, you can actually see, well, no, I'll just insert a clip here from when I turned my I'll just insert a clip here from where I turned one of my autistic awareness pens. And your traditional bushings for every pen other than a slimline, every pen bushing that has a shoulder like this, you can turn between centers. All you have to do is put the bushings in place just like you normally do, and this time, instead of sliding them up over a mandrel, you put them between centers. Let me show you. Put it up on your dead center, bring your tailstock up, lock it in place, advance your live center, and there you go. Now turn it like you would any other pen, or any other pen blank. Between centers, you're not going to get any wobble, you're not going to get any eccentricity.
what you're saying, or thinking, Billy, that's a mighty big skew for such a little blank. There's a story behind this skew, and I'll tell you later. I learned to learn to use a skew when I first started turning pins. I don't like gouges as a rule. I like my bowl gouges on bowls. I like a nice, steep grind spindle gouge when I'm doing spindle work. Big spindle work.
Once you have your pin barrels turned and finished, it's time to put the pin together. To do that, you're going to need a way to press the parts in. There are a number of manufacturers that make pin presses for this purpose. Again, just about anybody that sells pin kits is going to have these available. They're not cheap, they're not all that expensive, and here are a couple of other options. I'm going to show you my process for doing the press. A lot of people use dedicated pin press for this. I used to use clamps like this to do that, as is evident from the holes in where the pins wore the rubber pads out. I don't use those anymore. I made these little blocks out of oak and corian, and they fit on my lathe, and I use my lathe as a press. And I do that because I find I get more control, and it's something that's handy, and I've already got it. So I had scrap corian, I had scrap oak, I cut them to fit, and I'll show you how I do that. See if I can get you down there. This one is drilled to fit on the headstock spindle. This one is drilled for the tailstock. Take the first one up, line it up the way I want the clip to be. That's upside down. I want the clip like so. Lock the tailstock down. Once you get a little bit of pressure on it, line everything up and make sure it goes straight, and then just like that, Bob's your uncle. Pin is together. We talked about lathe chisels. Two optional lathe chisels that will come in real handy when you're turning pins are a round nose scraper and a detail gouge, especially if you put any kind of design work into your pin blanks or into your pin barrels, which I have a tendency to do. But remember, those are just optional tools. You may want a way to keep track of your bushings and your pin kits. I keep my bushings in these. I got these from a friend of mine some years back, and they're just little containers that parts and pieces come in. But any small container that you can label will work for keeping track of your bushings. And you may want a way to keep track of all your pin kits as well, if you really get into it and start doing more than one style. I use these types of containers for my pin kits. This is only 2 of the 6 that I have this size, and I have one about 3 times that size. And I keep some in 2 of these. Yes, I have a few different styles of pins that I turn when I turn pins. In the next episode, we'll talk about pin kits, who makes them, who the suppliers are, and some of your best options for finding them less expensively than going to Woodcraft or Rockler. Thanks again for watching, y'all. I really appreciate it. I hope this has helped. Please like and subscribe if you see something here that you like, and come back and see us.